Jody, Megan, and Lance, our panel, thank you for being here. Our members of the Mid-Columbia chapter, our associate members, and all those who are simply on the line because they find this a fascinating topic, welcome. Welcome to our panel on how our institutions of higher education in the Northwest are handling the COVID health crisis. Welcome. We have with us today Megan Murray, who is the Director of Marketing and Communication at Washington State University here in the beautiful Tri-Cities area. Thank you for joining us, Megan. Lance Kistler, with the red background there, Associate Vice President of University Relations at Eastern Washington University in the beautiful town of Cheney, Washington. And almost a stone's throw away a little bit, Jody Walker, Senior Director of Communications at the University of Idaho in beautiful Moscow, Idaho, where I had a chance to spend about a month myself going through a course there. Beautiful, beautiful campus and university. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Before we get going, I want to tell those on the line that this will be our last event of the season. We will take a break for the summer, and we will be back with bells on in September. Look forward to advertising for our future events, and thank you for staying with us throughout this season, which began last fall. So, Jody, no, I'm sorry, Megan. I jumped my script a little bit. Megan, let's begin with you. Tell us briefly, what was your number one challenge in PR space prior to COVID?
Yeah, so as I was introduced, I work at WSU Tri-Cities. I'm one of 6 campuses across the WSU system in Washington State. Probably one of the largest challenges as far as PR-wise, as far as an ongoing challenge, would probably have to be the perception of affordability of college. Trying to promote our programs and things, and it being kind of seen as a valued option, especially for first generation and non-traditional students, often can be kind of a hurdle. They see the kind of the upfront cost, scares them a little bit. Once it kind of makes them turn away from college and maybe want to go out into the workforce. Particularly in the Tri-Cities, we kind of have a very diverse community, and so that's a crucial component that we're always keeping up top of mind. But fortunately, through our PR strategies and those sorts of things, actually at WSU Tri-Cities, we have a very affordable option. We have much higher financial aid packages than most universities, merit-based awards, those sorts of things. We also have an excellent scholarship application program. So those are kind of some of the ways that we've been able to kind of tackle that issue as a whole, and make us seem a much more affordable option. As far as like more kind of not things that we've dealt with directly, but obviously school shootings and those sorts of things, we're always top of mind about scariness. You never want that and never expect that to happen at your school, but that's always something that we're actively preparing for if there is any sort of emergent crisis as it pertains to those sorts of very scary potential situations.
So all that was pre-COVID. Lance, how about at EWU? I think Megan touched on it. I was reading a Washington Post story that talked about the crisis for the higher education with regard to people wanting to maybe pursue vocational careers or other options. What were you all looking at?
Yeah, so we certainly were watching what was happening both nationally as well as regionally with trends around enrollment. And so that was kind of twofold. There was the what was actually happening, and then how was that impacting us? And then how do we communicate that to our campus community as well as the broader community? So I would echo in terms of changing preferences among prospective students and current students, everything from choosing vocational programs to choosing 4-year degree programs that were applied that some of the 2-year colleges started offering, more robust online programs, selecting those, or just simply not even choosing higher education and going straight from high school or whatever their situation was into the workforce. So we saw a lot of that. Also in the state, we saw a reduced number of FAFSA applications being completed. So that also showed a trend of fewer students expressing interest into going into higher education across the board. So when you see that happen, that means you're going to have a smaller pool of in-student or in-state students to pull from. And as that pie becomes smaller, everybody, you know, reaches into each other's slices of the pie. So a lot of the larger four-year institutions can tap into what wait lists they might have. And oftentimes those wait lists actually start to scrape some of the students that we would normally attract who weren't getting into maybe their first choice institution because they just weren't, you know, admitted into a program for whatever reason that may have been full or whatever it might have been. So we saw a lot of changes happen there. So that obviously impacted our enrollment. And while our head count actually stayed fairly consistent, what changed was our enrollment mix. And so depending upon the type of student you are and what program you're enrolled in, you bring a different level of tuition revenue to the university. Well, that tuition revenue then impacts the overall budget. And so it was difficult to try to communicate to people that while our head count was actually pretty decent, our mix of that head count actually impacted our revenue negatively. And so we had to reduce our budget accordingly. So that became really difficult for us to, you know, try to communicate, hey, and head count's great, but not the mix.
Right. Right. How about you, Jody? Did you all experience the headcount problems or any other issues pre-COVID that had you worried?
So pre-COVID, we had some pretty significant budget items that we were taking on. We had 2 consecutive years of significant operating losses, 18 million and 21 million. Our president started in June of 19 and was brought in to correct our financial situation. So by November of 19, we had implemented $14 million in budget cuts. We had taken 2 small hits from the state in that amount of time with some holdbacks. We had gone through voluntary furlough, a voluntary separation program, early retirement, and we're working on positioning ourselves to really correct that budget situation. So when January of 20 rolled around, we were geared up, ready for that tough fight. This isn't going to be easy, but we're going to get through this. And the good news for us on the other side of that is we came through it, and we can talk about good news later. But
Okay. So it sounds like maybe a little good fortune and coincidental planning may have helped you all ease into COVID. And so let's talk about COVID now. Before we do, I want to introduce to all our viewers right now. If you see the PRSA screen that says Mid-Columbia Chapter, that's actually Andrea McMakin, and she'll be tracking the chat room for all your questions, and we'll be presenting those to our panel as we move through the session, and probably most of them will hold to the end unless they really grab her, and then she'll jump in. So thank you for what you're doing there, Andrea. So on that transition, Lance, let's start with you. U of I was well positioned. You guys were struggling with that mix. What then became your number one challenge when COVID hit? And not COVID in general, but under that umbrella, what became your number one challenge, and does it still remain?
So I think public perception became probably our number one challenge was what's going on at Eastern, what's happening with budgets and with enrollment, and what's the climate on campus. It seems like the members of the faculty may have concerns with the administration, and there were just a number of different issues that were playing out in the public eye. So trying to manage those while then managing all of the issues related to the pandemic, in a way, the pandemic kind of shifted the spotlight somewhat, but then quickly we saw that the pandemic brought to light even more issues that were, any issues that were already there were then quickly exacerbated, right? And then more issues, of course, came up with the pandemic. So overall, it was just a really difficult communications challenge because we had internal communications around how we were going to address our budget and do so in an equitable manner, what it meant in terms of layoffs, furloughs, reduction in terms, changing people's schedules, things like that to mitigate the budget issues. And then at the same time, trying to instill confidence in our students and their families that yes, instruction will keep moving along. We're still a healthy, viable institution, but we need to make adjustments based upon what our enrollment numbers are looking like and what our budget reflects with that. So that became really difficult to try to communicate all in the midst of a pandemic and all of the public health information and ongoing day-to-day changes that were happening. You had multiple messages out there at the same time.
So Megan and Jody, would it be fair to say that you all dealt with the same type of challenges? Jody?
Absolutely. So we continued to address our budget challenges. In those first couple of weeks when I would say COVID really landed on our campus, everything became very tactical and very logistical. COVID hit just as we were heading into spring break. So at first, by Thursday of the week prior, we were messaging, hey, take your computer home with you, be prepared in case we can't come back, because no one knew what it meant. By Friday afternoon, we were messaging, we're probably not coming back, trying to make sure students had what they needed to be able to learn remotely, transitioning very quickly over spring break to online classes. And as soon as we had everyone situated there, immediately turning our focus to what do we do for fall? And by May, we were already messaging that we will be live in the fall. We are starting our own testing lab. We are putting things in place. We are committed to you to do our best to be live come August.
So that's good. Megan, what kind of craziness did you have that might be different from what Lance or Jody just said? And then I want to start really adding some good value to this. Go ahead and transition and tell us, Megan, how did you prioritize? And I'll ask the same question of you, Lance, and you, Jody, too. But Megan, what did you have on your hands, and how'd you prioritize it all?
Yeah, so probably a little bit different. We're primarily a commuter campus. We do have on-campus housing, but with being a commuter campus, we have a really, really high percentage of first-generation students and a very, very high low-income population of students that attend our institution. So when we made the announcement that we were going to go virtual in March, it kind of created a panic with students, because it's like at the same time, while they're trying to complete their classes with multi-generational households all in the same house, they're trying to deal with the distractions and those sorts of things. They're also working full time, also supporting their whole family. So we were trying to come up with some creative options while trying to instill that, yes, we're still going to provide you an exceptional virtual experience. This is how we can also support you if you're going to run into some of those crisis modes at home. And so that was a significant PR challenge. Some of the ways that we tried to help remedy that, we immediately established emergency hardship funding for our students. That became a fundraising priority for us, and we tried to leverage that as much as we could in messaging. We used everything from email to text messaging campaigns to our students. We also set up some creative programs, one of which was for our veteran student population. Our veteran students took the lead on fundraising to purchase a set of laptops that veteran students could check out. Because for some students, if they were kind of in limbo period with either their GI Bill or their financial aid hadn't come in quite yet for that next fall, some of them were kind of scrambling for like, how am I going to afford technology and those sorts of things. So yeah, email, it was definitely regular communication each week to students about this is the state of where we're at. This is where we're going to go. A lot of unknowns right now at the moment, but this is how we want to support you as best we can.
So some great initiatives there with vets and fundraising. And so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit from some of the pre-questions that our panel saw, because Lance, I know you all had quite a thing going on there with fundraising at EWU. Tell us about that and your other priorities as this crisis was unfolding.
Yeah, so similar, we have a number of first generation college students as well, and we do have the residential component to our classes. I'm not certain what our current ratio is in terms of how many students are living on campus versus how many are living in the immediate vicinity. But flexibility became the key word that we needed to put in place for everyone, so that if you wanted to stay on campus, you could. And if you needed to go home, you could, because there were those who needed to go be with their family members and support them, whatever their situation was. But we also didn't want to harm them in terms of, I shared a room with a roommate and was only paying this dollar amount, and now I have to pay this dollar amount for a single bedroom. So we changed a lot of our fee structures. We waived all of our online course fees. What was a challenge was to communicate why we were still maintaining some of the fees that we had that were mandated, such as our university recreation fee. That center was actually, that fee pays off that bond. And if we don't pay that bond, then we go into a default. And that fee was imposed by students upon students, of course, a number of years ago when it was originally constructed. So we had, that was a challenge to say, you know, here's what we're doing to support you, but there are some things that we're not able, unfortunately, to remove or change. So on top of that, we launched a couple of fundraising initiatives. One was we started selling masks to branded masks to alumni in the community. So the purchase of all those generated revenue, which then went to support students. It helped spin up a campus support peer network. It's 24/7. I think it's called Talk Campus. Support group, also provided some funding for students. We had a student emergency fund. We had laptop grants, things like that we provided. But what was really neat that came out of this was a local foundation. We had been working with them on this initiative, and the timing could not have been better. They wanted to support students who were maybe at risk of not either continuing on to their senior year or not making it to graduation because they may be short $1,000, $500. Maybe they were in an internship and they were choosing to perhaps not move forward with the internship because they needed to work and earn money instead of having an unpaid internship. So we were lucky and fortunate enough to launch the Eagle On initiative, which is intended to help students in their junior, senior year who might be facing just a small dollar amount that keeps them from moving forward or graduating. Provide them with these micro grants or small scholarships or internship money to help them persist or to graduate. So we pushed that pretty hard. We used the theme Eagle Strong to really kind of wrap around not just the public health message, but also how you can support students if you're willing to contribute philanthropically. Sorry.
Okay, great. Jody, how did you all prioritize? Did you have any equivalent to a Vandal On type initiative there at OI? Not OI, UI?
We did. Much of what Lance is saying is very similar to the tactics we used. We did an immediate fundraising effort to help students with those immediate needs. My roommate moved home, I'm staying here, how do I pay my rent? My daycare just closed, how do I take care of my kid? Those sorts of things. We followed that every spring. We have Vandal Giving Day. So we turned the entire Vandal Giving Day into an effort for our students and raised over $600,000 for our students and their needs. So we completed all of that. We addressed technology needs and scholarship, military veteran programs, kind of all the same things that Megan and Lance have addressed. We had similar tactics that we used here at ULI.
So as we move on through this session, I'd like you all to kind of think about, because I think some of our viewers are probably thinking about it. How do you keep the lights on? How do you keep faculty employed, staff employed, groundskeepers employed when you're cutting fees and being so compassionate, nicely so, to the student population? Very curious how you do that, but keep that in the back of your mind maybe and weave it into some other questions. I'd like to know, did any of you have a pandemic plan on the shelf when this thing hit?
So we didn't have specifically a pandemic plan. We do have an infectious disease response team that had been put together 5 or 6 years prior to this. And we meet a couple times a year, and then we do a tabletop exercise every year. So we started with that group. They were the initial response. That group then grew as the pandemic, because we realized the pandemic was what it was. That group grew and evolved into the people who needed to be at the table. But we had a well-documented and well-practiced emergency plan for an infectious disease.
There's an old saying, no plan survives first contact. How did your plan hold up, Jody?
Amazingly well. That combined with just our regular crisis communication plan that we have, everyone knew where they fit. So it actually worked very, very well.
Megan, how about in your space with plans on the shelf?
Yeah, so we have maybe not a pandemic plan. I don't think anybody foresaw this coming in the months leading up, but we do have an emergency structure. It's our incident command response plan. Similar to what Jody was indicating, we have a team of individuals in a structure, and we do tabletop drills every semester. As far as it applies to like an infectious disease situation, a lot of the response is relatively similar. There's that initial emergent incident that you have to deal with. The chancellor gets removed. The incident command structure goes into place. The PR person has their specific roles. We have an incident commander, a logistics person. And so that actually worked really well, especially when we made the decision to go virtual. Our faculty only had about a week to 2 weeks to prepare for the switch to virtual learning, because similar to the other institutions, it was right about spring break. So they had that week leading up. But it worked relatively well because each person had kind of their designated responsibilities, and everybody kind of went into command mode. On that topic, though, the pandemic has proved to be pretty interesting because it's not just an emergent crisis and then you deal with like the several weeks fallout after the fact. It's this months-long plan. And so trying to convert our initial emergency response plan into kind of this stagnant, forever going thing has been relatively interesting. I don't think anybody foresaw that this was going to lead up to being a year-long process. And so we've had to adapt some processes and procedures based on that. But overall, it's worked pretty well.
Did you participate in these tabletop drills?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe what we've learned is the next tabletop drill needs to be about a week long to really prepare us. Lance, how about over in your area? Plans on the shelf? Any drills?
So we had, crisis plans in place. It's similar to other institutions, and we of course had to, adjust that once we realized that this was not going to be something short term. I think we all thought that this might be something that would last for a couple of weeks, or maybe this would be like, H1N1 in the past, or other, possible threats that we had dealt with back years ago. So that quickly shifted. I think one thing that was unique for us was that we operate on both a quarter system and a semester system. So similar to what Jody and Megan shared on the semester side, we're getting ready to go into spring break. And so we're addressing all of those student and faculty concerns. But on the quarter side, we were getting ready to go into finals week. And so we had to make the tough decision that all finals were going to get moved online. Faculty members had struggled with that because here they had planned, all these finals were in person, whether they were labs or tests or whatever they might be. And now all of a sudden you have to switch to an online format with very little notice. So first, I want to applaud our faculty for switching midstream like that. They didn't get to have a spring break to kind of, prep like the semester programs did. Not that week long of spring break was much time to prep anyway. Yeah. So that was, of course, a challenge. And that was also a communication challenge all pandemic long, was, communicating to those two different audiences. You've got the semester programs and you got the quarter programs, and making sure that you're being very specific about what the impacts are to both of those.
Well, I'm sure your peers here wish they had semester and quarter programs too, to make their lives a little more challenging. So question for you. You had plans on the shelf, you implemented the plans. Jody, you said they just went swimmingly well. Megan and Lance, you talked about fundraising and fee cuts for students. How did this impact your overall enrollment? What did you see as an impact? Was there an impact? We'll start with Lance on that.
Yeah, so as as I mentioned before, we were already facing some of the other external factors on enrollment, and then what you throw into the mix is this pandemic. And so, what's difficult to tell is our students. So here's some of the things we did see. Spring quarter, we saw that there were some students who chose to just take that quarter off because they didn't want to deal with online instruction. That was early on. People thought that, oh, maybe by the time summer or fall comes around, we'll be through this and ready to go. So there were certainly some impacts there with some students choosing to take that spring quarter off for whatever the reason might be. Then we move into summer and fall, and some students decided to take a gap year because once they realized that instruction was going to probably be mostly online, some of them may have chosen to go to a different institution that was going to have in-person classes. But I do think we saw some dips based upon an online approach. We developed our we called it Max Flex program to try to offer the most flexibility to students so that they could study from wherever they wanted to be, whether it was on campus or off campus, at home, in a apartment nearby, or wherever, even abroad. I'm actually teaching a class right now, and I have a student who's attending our Zoom meetings while she is living in Russia. So we've got students all over the place choosing to be where they want to be based upon what was most comfortable for them. I think what we're going to see moving forward is more preference of modality. So there might be students who choose to go with an online program versus an in-person program, just based upon what works best for them and based upon what their experience was over the past year or so. Other factors are going to be, their living situations, their financial situations, and so on and so forth. So I think that this fall is going to be interesting to see where it goes. And part of that's also going to be where does the national conversation go around the value of higher education again? So that's going to kind of come back into play this fall.
Right. So Megan, you're sort of a hometown piece of WSU here in the Tri-Cities. I'm thinking maybe you didn't have as much of the gap year phenomena that Lance was talking about. How were you all impacted?
We did see a slight dip in enrollment. We were actually predicting for a much higher percentage. I think we were predicting a 10 to 15% drop. And I think our ending figures in fall ended up being about 5 to 6%, which we have a relatively small student population. We're about 17 to 1,800 students at any one semester. So that small percentage can be a huge hit to our budget. However, I think with us being so hyper local and serving kind of a regional Benton Franklin County student base, we didn't see as much of that gap year phenomenon. We also worked pretty hard to basically make it clear to students that gap year probably isn't the best way to go, because there can be impacts to students' financial aid. When they take a gap year away or a gap semester even away, their loans will go into kind of a shift into that prepayment mode. Students can defer for 6 months to 9 months, I believe, but still that can cause issues for their financial aid packages down the road. So we just wanted to make that clear to students, like, if you keep going, we will do our best to support you in any way we can with the switch to virtual learning, but we also want to make sure that you're set up for success moving on to future forward semesters so that your financial aid package isn't in jeopardy.
Okay, thank you. Jody, I recall from my time there in Vanderland that you all had a lot of students from Boise, and I would imagine that in Boise they probably had a lot of students from Moscow, kids trying to get away from home. COVID comes, hits. How does it impact enrollment, and how do you all respond to it?
So we had been fighting for several years stagnant enrollment, and had really put a lot of effort into it. So heading into 2020, our applications were up 17%. We were looking forward to a really great year.
Wow.
And really excited about what that was going to mean for the fall. And then COVID hit, and we began to hear these horror predictions of, how far is higher education going to drop this year nationally. And we came back in the fall, we saw only a 3% dip, which was pretty incredible. As I said, we returned in person. Students did have choices. They could participate in many of their classes remotely if they so chose. But we were live, we were in person with students in the classroom, and I think it really made a difference. And that we're seeing that roll over into the coming year in our applications that are coming in. We're seeing an incredible increase of out-of-state students, specifically from California. Not only are California schools full, but California schools have been online, and we're hearing students say, we want to be in person. You proved you could be in person and be safe. We're going to come join you.
Okay, well, let's launch off that note, and I'll come around to all of you on this. So U of I has been in person all year long, is that correct? Very different from our Washington universities. How did you reassure students and their parents that the classrooms, the lecture halls, the dorms were all safe places to be?
Mm-hmm. So we started those conversations early. As I said, by May, our president had made the declaration that we are going to do everything within our power to be live. So we immediately started building our own lab. We set up our own testing facility in collaboration with our local hospital, so everyone could be tested right here on campus. Made it so that back, if you remember early in the pandemic, it was up to a week or more that it took people to get their results. We were able to turn results around in 24 hours so that we could really tackle hotspots. We could address those needs. We set up an isolation area for our students who had tested positive, so we could remove them from the general population. They had all the technology there they needed, that if they were feeling up to it, they could continue to participate. And because we were testing everyone, we had a fair number of students who were asymptomatic, who were still able to participate in their education while in the isolation area. But as far as the tools and tactics that we use to get people here in the first place, and this kind of goes to the one question that I see in the chat of what communications channels did we introduce? During that summer, we did a lot of Facebook Live events with the Dean of Students. And we invited everybody, parents, students, grandparents, whomever had questions. And we had some really healthy, really challenging conversations in those Facebook Live events. It's a tool that we hadn't used in that way before, but that proved incredibly valuable. People could come, they could hear directly from our Dean of Students what we were doing and ask the questions that were at the top of their mind.
Fantastic. Lance, Eastern Washington took a completely 180 different approach. No in-class learning, is that correct, during the last year? And how did you manage that with students and parents?
So we were primarily online. We did have some classes that were labs or practicum that were permitted to be held in person, but that involved regular testing with those students and faculty. And we did some partnership with WSU on their campus in Spokane for some of those, as well as our new building in downtown Spokane, the Catalyst. We had one challenge that we had with our primary campus in Cheney was that we don't have a clinic or a health center on that campus. So we don't have this medical operation where we can do regular surveillance testing and keep that data and so on. We did eventually, we were able to get testing up and going I think it was this winter, spring, but we didn't have widespread surveillance testing outside of those very specific program areas where we had some in-person instruction, as well as the athletics program, which had NCAA requirements around being tested. So we went forward with this Max Flex program. We were one of the first to announce what our approach was going to be last year. Because students were wanting to know. They wanted to make their decision about what they were going to do that fall, and we needed to get out there sooner rather than later. And we didn't want to create any false promises. So what we came up with was the idea that we are going to put together this flexible approach where if we're able to be in person that fall, great, you're welcome to come to campus. But if you don't feel comfortable coming to campus, we're going to offer everything online, and you can stay wherever you want and participate in those classes online remotely. If we, for whatever reason, start out in person and need to move online, we're not going to kick you off campus. You can continue to take your classes online. You can stay wherever you are. And the reverse was true, that if we were online and then we were able to come back to campus because the pandemic was, lightening up a bit, which didn't happen, as we all saw. we weren't going to force you to return back to campus. You could continue your classes wherever you were. So that was the idea behind the Max Flex approach, was to give people that ability to choose what they thought worked best for them and be able to flex back and forth with within that. So that, of course, was a challenge for us to communicate to parents and students. It was a bit different than what some other institutions had announced. Some wanted to be all in person. Others were announcing that they were going to be entirely online. We did similar with like Facebook Live. We did a lot of Instagram Live. We found that our admissions team found that actually engaged our prospective student audience the most. We held town halls via Zoom and would broadcast those out. So I think the social media live concept, similar to U of I, was very successful for us. We also did employ some texting tools that were available through some of our departments on campus. And I know we have a question later on if we get to it about texting and some of the other resources out there. So I won't go into too much detail about that right now.
Okay, well, we'll switch back to that shortly. Megan, how did this new disruption in program and format impact you, and how did you respond in communication space?
Yeah, so over the summer, we were really hopeful that we could offer in person, but it just didn't end up being an option, especially in Benton Franklin County. We saw pretty high spikes later in the summer of case rates and those sorts of things. So we did ultimately make the decision to go mostly virtual. There are a handful of programs that were able to still offer some in-person activities. They weren't full courses, but they were still in-person experiences. A primary one of which was our WSU nursing program. It's very hard for nursing students to do their thing and learn how to be nurses without that hands-on application. So they were still able to access their simulation lab. Clinicals were on hold for a little bit, but they were still able to get into those at a later point once the case rates had kind of leveled out a bit. Some of our engineering courses were still able to access their labs, especially our senior engineering students. They have those senior capstone projects where they're actually building physical things. So they needed that space to be able to get into some of those classrooms. And then some of our science labs, similar to what Lance said, were also in person. As far as like best ways of how we communicated all these things and kind of balance that out and provided to parents, especially that this was going to be a safe environment. We held, and this is something that we're still continuing, but for a while we held weekly COVID-19 open forums. They were open to students, faculty, staff, and their parents. We also have utilized YouTube to a much larger extent than we ever have before. Our student life department actually initiated this new kind of cool program called Kook Packs, where students can receive a kind of a package of materials of activities, and then they completed those activities live as part of a YouTube live session, which was actually wildly popular. That may be something that we continue on into the future for students that can't get to campus for whatever reason. And then, yeah, lots of social media messaging, direct emails, texting became a crucial tool for us, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, those were kind of the successful tactics that we implemented.
Let's just jump into that right now, since you also brought it up. And Jody, I'll move it over to you. Let's talk about social media, digital media. Did you all find yourself using it more so or to a broader level? For instance, Lance, you had mentioned Instagram. Curious if you used Instagram before the crisis hit, that sort of thing. We'll start with Jody, though. Let's talk about digital media, texting, and that sort of communication. How did it evolve or change with the pandemic?
Right. The tool that we use the most, as I indicated a little bit earlier, really was adding that Facebook Live component to our communications. We did the same thing through some Zoom sessions, just trying to find those ways where we could pull people together across the state who had questions and answer them all at the same time, so that everybody was getting the same message at the same time. We don't have a great text tool to be able to get to our students or our staff. I don't think you ever have all the tools that you'd like to have when crisis hits. But once we settled into how we were going to do it, we stuck with it. We also found that people were not welcoming change during this pandemic. It was, tell me what I need, where I need to be, how I need to do it, and just let me try to survive day to day. And so once we set up that your communications are going to come primarily through your email, they're going to come every Monday. We're then going to post that same message on the COVID website that we built. These are the places that you're going to go to find your information. I had a really hard lockdown in the beginning of no other web page on our site could host COVID information. It all had to be on the main COVID page or built off of the main COVID page so that people did not have to go searching for things. And so once people knew where to go for their information, it mattered less about the tool and more about the training of where those answers were.
Yeah, but you did not employ text widely, correct? Okay. Now, Lance, you did. So, Jody had her model, an email every Monday. We'll send you to one location. What did your model look like?
So we started similarly with a hub, with a site where our team came up with a coronavirus website where that's where all the information was going to get posted or be linked off to. So very similar to what Jody shared, I put on a hard lockdown immediately that we didn't want other sites spinning up their own COVID information. We only let that happen as long as we were linking from our COVID site to theirs, and they had this guarantee that they were going to maintain that information on a regular basis. But otherwise, we wanted everything located primarily on our COVID page. We created this giant Google Doc that had all of the information for that COVID page in there, and invited people to contribute to it from across campus, because we weren't the subject matter experts. We didn't know what was necessarily happening within student life or in the residential halls or whatever the different areas might be. And so they would send that communication to us via suggested changes in the Google Doc, and then we would confirm that information and then publish it out to the live site. So we had developed this process where this Google Doc was sort of this document of record, so that we could see what was changing and evolving, and what so that way whatever was on the site we knew was accurate. And while we were working on things, it kind of lived in this Google Doc in a draft stage before it got published live. So that's where we drove everyone to, was the COVID site. We used email on a regular basis. At first it was daily that messages were coming out, and then we started to get more into a cadence of, okay, let's not send something out until we feel like there's enough information to send something out, unless of course it's something very timely. We use social media. We had the town halls and so on. When it came to texting, we had the opportunity to utilize our emergency campus information system. It's called E2 alerts or something like that. And what it does is it sends out a text message and an email to every one of them that's on file. And it comes as a short alert. Well, we typically only use that in a situation where it's, life is in danger in that moment. It might be a natural disaster. It might be a bomb threat. It might be an active shooter, or whatever the situation might be. We want you to take action immediately. And that's, pay attention to this. What I didn't want to have happen is corrupt that trust, that behavior with that tool, that medium, by starting to push out pandemic alerts via this system. So what we did rely upon is some areas on campus, like our advising and residential hall system, they have some texting tools in place. So we were able to use some texting tools that didn't reach all of our campus community, but did reach some large populations.
So you remind me of a takeaway I took from the nuclear industry. Use the right tool for the job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good call. Megan, what did your model look like? And I'm curious, did it take a while to find the cadence that Lance was speaking to?
Yeah, so I will say one thing that we actually experienced was students were getting so much information to their email, whether from WSU Tri-Cities, whether it be from our larger WSU system, whether it be just from corporations trying to get them interested in all these different things or alert them about brands or whatever. Students actually, we saw a decrease in response from email. So we were trying to figure out different tools and things that would work the best. Social media obviously is a huge tool, especially Instagram. That's kind of the primary platform other than TikTok that students are actively on for large periods of time. For parents, that primary platform would probably be Facebook. And then also we used YouTube for open forums and those sorts of things. But one tool that we actually implemented, and we actually thankfully started to implement this prior to the pandemic, was a texting tool. It's basically an opt-in platform that students can sign up for. We don't send anything more than once a week because we don't want it to become obnoxious. That can be obnoxious really quickly if you've ever received text messages from other brands. But basically the email correspondence were for like direct messaging, emergency related stuff. We have emergency related alert system similar to what Lance was talking about. But again, that's for more crisis, immediate concern situations. But this texting tool, we were able to send out important deadlines, information about our emergency hardship funds and how to apply for those. We have an on-campus food pantry, which a lot of students are aware of, but may not be actively thinking about, especially with some of those multi-generational households that might have lost their jobs. And so that became kind of a good tool that we would send out a message maybe once every couple weeks to students to just let them know about important resources that they should access because email was so overwhelming at the time. And then as far as that cadence messaging is concerned, it worked really well for us once we kind of got into the consistency of things to hold those open forums every Tuesday morning. And then the day after, without fail, we would always send a wrap-up message about everything and all the questions that were addressed as part of that and in a single email. And that worked really well, and people came to really rely on that message. And it was also good because if people weren't able to attend that meeting live in person, they could always go back and just quickly read through the headlines of that. So that worked really well for us.
Fantastic. So a variety of tools were used by all of you, not all quite the same. So I'm going to lead us in, looking at the time here, into a wrap-up question, but I'm going to make it a doozy of a wrap-up question. I'm going to ask you, and we'll start with you, Jody, a three-part question. What was your biggest lesson learned, your greatest success, and what tool do you hope to have in the future that would have made both of those a little bit better for you?
Biggest lesson learned, getting the right people at the table from the beginning.
Uh-huh.
Greatest success was the fact that we did remain in person all semester. Our average infection rate was 2.5%, which was half of the rate of the town around us and less than half the rate of the state. So
That's actually amazing.
We did it, which was fantastic. And what tool would I want to implement? We do not have an intranet. We do not have a way to post and communicate directly with our staff and faculty through any sort of internet system or intranet system.
Mm-hmm. And you know, in crisis, I won't say crisis communicators, the crisis teachers out there always unroll a whole bunch of tools that they want companies to invest in. And a lot of them require quite an investment, but often dark sites are mentioned as well. Have a dark site ready, but usually it's about communicating with the public, not necessarily a dark site facing the internal audience. So that's a very interesting takeaway that you have there. Lance, how about you? Lesson learned, greatest success, and what tool do you want to have next time around that you didn't this time?
Well, some very similar answers. I'll try to first came into my mind, but I'll try to add some different context to them. So, you know, I think the lesson that we learned was that, you know, PR and communications and marketing are a critical component of any business operation and strategy. And so making sure that you have that person involved. I think one thing that we saw was early on, we set up a war room, and, you know, I was in those sessions with the executive leadership team, identifying what the decisions were that we need to make and, you know, logging those. And I was there to get an understanding in the context of why those decisions were being made the way that they were, how they came to those, so I could help communicate that as part of our messaging out. But then that once we ended up going remote, that quickly shifted, and, you know, we went into Zoom meetings, and I wasn't always there at the table So sometimes I didn't have that background and information. And so our kind of traditional way of setting up a crisis management system worked really well while we were in person. But then once we moved to a virtual realm, it didn't really translate over all that well. So that was a lesson learned.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Oh,
Jody
sure.
mentioned having the right people at the table, and you've now introduced not only having the right people at the table, but having them at the table every time you get together.
Yes.
Yeah, please keep going.
Something that turned out better than what we expected, or something that was successful, in addition to maintaining some low infection rates within our community. I know we, as soon as people were watching our stats page, and we'd have news inquiries, we'd have community member inquiries, asking about what we were doing to mitigate those numbers. We were all fearful of the sorority, fraternity parties that would turn into super spreader events. I'd say that thankfully we didn't see much of that happen. What we did end up doing was pulling off a virtual grand opening event. So our new Catalyst building in downtown Spokane in the U District area, the other partners, it's a public-private partnership, they wanted to move forward with a grand opening, and we said, okay, let's do it. And so we actually utilized some of our own faculty and staff, a multidisciplinary approach to help launch that. They put together a website, a whole media kit, some videos, and then we live streamed a grand opening with speakers there and pre-recorded videos, and it went off beautifully. It went really, really well. So it was great to not only be able to have that event happen, but then to also turn it into an experiential learning opportunity for our own students and faculty. And then as far as the tool goes, my answer is going to be exactly the same. The internal communications piece. One, I'd like to hire someone who focuses solely on internal communications, and then to really build out that strategy around it. We do have somewhat of an intranet. It's not protected in terms of, anyone can access it. We call it Inside EWU, but you don't have to be a member of the campus community to read what's posted there. But really just driving that behavior of that's where information is going to be posted, and then having that person who really can facilitate on an ongoing basis our internal communication strategy.
They say it's frequently the last thing we think about is the internal communication piece, yet the most important. Mm-hmm. And a crisis brings that to the fore. Megan, the same big three, greatest success lesson learned, and what tool would you like to have next time? And I'm showing my local bias. I didn't do it intentionally. We're starting and ending with our hometown university here. Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, so I'm going to break up the lesson learned into kind of two groups of people. For our leadership, it was definitely realizing that our communications person is crucial. So that was a huge win for us. We were involved in every conversation, and it's been a really good ongoing collaborative relationship. We're a much closer, cohesive team almost as a result of this experience. As far as the biggest success, it's just the tools that we've implemented. I think we've increased cross collaboration across not only our campus, but across our WSU system. As I mentioned, we're one of 6 WSU campuses. Our Pullman campus is the largest kind of mothership, as we call it. And so the communication back and forth between kind of our larger institution in Pullman to the smaller campuses across the state has exponentially grown and gotten better. And that's really as a result of using tools like Zoom and tools like our communications listserv that we may not have used as much before for email communication to all of our communicators. As far as like what tool would we want to implement, I think really it is the tools that we have already implemented. The access for both students, staff, and faculty through Zoom, I think has been a really crucial tool. It's allowed us as a university expand educational access. Students who may never thought that they would have been able to enroll in classes can now do so. It's provided greater flexibility for us across the board as a WSU campus. And so, yeah, I think that's been a huge win for higher education. It's made us much more nimble and flexible, and just show how accessible education really can be.
Fantastic. I like your close there with nimble and flexible, because Jody brought us in a couple takeaways I want to share with you all. you all had plans on the shelf. Jody's point resonated that hers worked brilliantly. It sounds like yours, Megan, and Lance worked as well too. But to see a plan come to fruition says a lot about the pre-thought and plan. You didn't know it would be necessarily for COVID per se, but it worked out great, and you had one of the lowest infection rates in your community, in your state, which is really phenomenal. Lance, you came in and underscored the importance of having an internal command, and internal intranet type of program or communication program. Cannot forget staff and employees. Megan, nimble and flexibility. Those have to be the two key words going into any crisis, and then sustaining a solid risk communication program. I see we don't have any questions in the chat. I want to throw it out there. If someone wants to throw a question out, we have about a minute and a half or so left. Otherwise, while you're thinking about that, I recognize a lot of names on the list here. A lot of folks may be part of PRSA. If not, I always got to put the plug in. Join the Public Relations Society of America. We get these great publications every every month, strategic and strategies and tactics. This month focuses coincidentally on crisis management. Last month focused on internal communication, two of the things we're talking about here today. So I don't see anything else there in the chat. So I will wrap us up by saying thank you, Jody. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Lance, for bringing your insights to us. And please keep our institutions of higher learning going strong. Keep the enrollments up. I still have kids to send your direction.
Can I also add, I want to thank all the faculty and staff out there who worked really hard over this past year and more to ensure that our students could stay enrolled and persist. That's going to be super important, because what we don't want is a generation lost of future, employees and contributors to society. So I want to thank all of them for everything they did to help support all of our students.
Jody and Megan, I assume you'll roll in with the same sentiments.
Absolutely.
Hey, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, this is recorded. It'll be on the Mid-Columbia PRSA website, and you can share it broadly at your convenience.